Atamarie, kia ora koutou katoa, good morning and welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us for this webinar with Holmes Consulting on the opportunities for the future of New Zealand infrastructure. My name is Roselle and I'm Kea's Partnership and Events Manager. Some quick housekeeping before we get started this morning. We have allocated time at the end of this session to answer some audience questions. If you have any you wish to ask the panelists, please put these in the Q&A section below. If you have any that you would like to direct to a specific panelist, please state that as well. For those of you who are new to who Kea are, we were founded in 2001 at a time when many of our best and brightest Kiwi minds were heading overseas. So Stephen Tyndall and Professor David Teese recognised that for a nation as small and geographically remote as Aotearoa, offshore Kiwi were crucial to our ongoing global connectedness. 20 years later, Kea continues to focus on keeping our offshore Kiwi part of home. One of our main focuses is showcasing to broader New Zealand the significant opportunities in connecting with both offshore and returning Kiwi, which brings us to this webinar. We would like to highlight the opportunities in the infrastructure industry by speaking to our expert panelists who we will introduce shortly. But first, I would like to introduce you to our MC for the panel, Lydia Cooper. Lydia is the team leader of the structures team at Holmes Consulting. Haere mai, welcome Lydia. Before we get into the discussion, can you please tell us a little about who Holmes Consulting are?
Kia ora. Ko uhinera te maunga te ru nei taku nakau. Ko tamaki te awe I mehe ne aku mahara. Ko Ngāti Pākehā te iwi. Ko tamaki makaro aho. I mihi ana ki ngā tohu o nei o remuera I noho nei ao. No reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So one of the benefits of getting to MC an event like this is I get to one, practice my pepeha, and two, I also get to tell you about who I work for. So Holmes Consulting has worked in New Zealand for about 60 years. We started as a very small company. We work now on some exciting and award-winning projects. So Commercial Bay won the Property Council Award last night, Supreme Award, so that was really awesome, but also Christchurch Town Hall and the new Dunedin Hospital. While Commercial Bay won the award yesterday, the Christchurch Town Hall also won the Heritage and Supreme categories at the iStrike Awards, so reaching a little bit further than our local New Zealand. And so we're well known for recognising international engineering excellence. We have 6 offices in New Zealand and an office in the Netherlands. We also have a sister company in the States. We have a strong contingency of staff from overseas and plenty of Kiwi returners who have gone and done their OE and come back to us. So we'll get underway with the panel discussion. First off, I'm welcoming one of my colleagues from Holmes, Wayne Juno. So Wayne is a senior leader at Holmes Consulting. He has a track record for delivering large infrastructure projects across New Zealand. He's the business manager of our Wellington office and leads the Wellington and Christchurch civil structures teams. So Wayne, for those who have been away from New Zealand, how has the infrastructure industry changed in the last decade and how do the opportunities here compare to those overseas?
Thanks, Lydia. Kia ora, everybody, and thanks very much for having me here today. Look, I think one of the biggest changes here in Aotearoa aligns with a theme of regeneration. We live in a really active and diverse landscape, and alongside well broadcast earthquakes from Christchurch and Kaikoura over the past decade, we regularly see the impact through damage or disruption of other climate-based events on our infrastructure. These natural shocks trigger a need for response, rebuild, regeneration of infrastructure. And it's been essential for us to re-establish supply of basic services after each. And in a broader context, though, reconnecting our communities has taken on a greater meaning and focus in the way that much of our engineering activity has been directed. And if you want to go to the next slide, one example is Te Pai and Christchurch Convention Centre, which is due to open in the coming months. So that's shown there on the left. Facilities like this provide more than just a conference hall. They offer co-working opportunities and an urban hub for a range of different types of employment, a sense of place for everyone in a community to be proud of as that city in particular crafts an updated definition for itself. And on the right, you can see an image of the Kaikoura coastline and some of the good work that was done by the Alliance in re-establishing transport networks up there as well. Can you flip to the next slide, please, Roselle? I think one of the big changes over the past decade kind of could come under a theme of connectivity and the need to meet broader social outcomes. The breadth of connectedness that we seek from our infrastructure now is much greater than 10 years ago. And an example of this is investment in the Auckland City Rail Link, which is our biggest ever infrastructure spend for a project. The investment isn't just in a few kilometres of train track, but to enable improved access to everything above that rail corridor and a sense of freedom to get back to for human use of the areas above the ground. And associated with that one is this project, which is up on the screen. Transport links like CRL enable us to take on other infrastructure development like Aotearoa Central, which is shown here. It's a 21-storey building with a mix of uses, which sits on top of new Aotearoa Station, which is forecast to be the busiest train station in New Zealand. This project is really exciting. It'll be our first true transit-oriented development of its type in NZ. It represents a major statement of intent around our use of non-car modes of transport and an increased diversity in the accommodation options that we provide to New Zealanders. To realise infrastructure projects like this, we need to confront complex technical issues and accommodate social needs as well. And you can see that the shape of the building is tailored to ensure that light and views are maintained in the adjacent square, again highlighting the importance of a focus on connectedness to the environment and the streetscape around, as well as connectedness to each other. So I think that's a major theme that kind of runs through a lot of the infrastructure work that we do. Can you flick to the next slide, please? The final one I think is worth highlighting in terms of connectedness comes from other critical infrastructure. Here you've got a digital network map from Watercare and one of around 20 replacement structures from the North Auckland rail line in a project that was done last year. We've created an infrastructure commission as well in New Zealand in the past decade, and we've got the construction sector accord as well. And organisations like those provide a voice for the importance of generally doing infrastructure well and the importance of that to a thriving NZ. And so that includes advocating for fair contracts, for the value of good asset management, or even, I suppose for this audience, the opening of extra MIQ slots specifically for essential construction sector workers, so that people can come and contribute to the ongoing maintenance and improvement of our connections. So I suppose, yeah, in quick time, that's probably some of the major changes that I've seen over the past decade.
It's great, Wayne. I mean, there is a huge amount of investment currently in infrastructure in New Zealand. So thinking about all those experts that live overseas, what opportunities exist for New Zealand companies like Holmes to benefit from the skills and expertise of those who might be looking to return?
Yeah, I think if we go to the next slide, having a future focus is really important. And again, what we need is kind of New Zealand focused solutions to our future needs, but obviously need to continue to be doing better with what we've got and to be using all the advancements available in an international context as well. So Omarara Reservoir here is one in Wellington, where we've drawn on a design team from Holmes and from Becker. And we've had key contributors to deliver this design who've brought a diversity of training and of background and of mindset and certainly of skill set from all around the world. And it's one really cool story from this one is we've kind of tailored that to a local context, and ultimately one of the key assumptions of the design was eventually proven by laying polythene down on rock, putting some concrete on top and pulling it along with a digger. So it's great fun to be able to mix with a whole heap of people and kind of experts in their field to be able to realize some really cool projects like this, which will be a buried tank and ultimately not really be that visible to the community in the future, but to solve some of those problems in a good old-fashioned kind of number 8 wire type context as well. And if we go to the next slide, I think it's just worth highlighting too the value of sustainability in the way that we approach infrastructure. This is woven through everything that we talk about. the types of sustainability problems and climate change problems that we're confronted with in New Zealand are worldwide things, and so we need to keep up with international trends and movements and advancements. And so there's a couple of examples here when it comes to renewable energy. There's a proof of concept or a design underway for checking into what Lake Onslow may end up looking like as a hydro battery, essentially. And equally, there's exciting work that's being done in partnering and exploring international best practice, I suppose. So there's a partnership being formed with Genesis and Tilt Renewables, which is looking at development of further wind farms throughout the country, and obviously with that we need to connect with international expertise, and so any experience that's being brought back from people who've worked overseas is valuable either directly or indirectly in either bringing diversity of thought to what we do, or of bringing those essential examples of things that have been done recently in an international context.
It's great, Wayne. I think, drawing on all the international experience, the advancements and best practice that get applied there, and not just having to rely on research, but actually have real world experience is super important to delivering some of the projects that we will have in New Zealand in the next coming decade. So joining us next is Amos Kamo. Amos is the Director of Policy and Performance at Aotearoa, Homes and Communities. Amos is also a board member at Concave, an organisation that connects and aligns industry learners and vocational education to reimagine clear, equitable and supported career pathways within the construction and infrastructure sector. Amos, Wayne's been talking about the diversity that offshore Kiwi bring to the infrastructure industry. How about the diversity that we can bring in through embracing the Pacific and Māori culture?
Kia ora. Nā mihi ki a koe, nā mihi ki a koutou katoa. Me ki kua tai mai ki te whakarongo ki a tātou. Nā me mō te penui tine ata, me kororo e pāna ki maha o nā kaupapa ke mui a tātou i tine wa. Ko Amos Kamo hau, heuri tine o nā iwi o nai tahu nā timutunga ke whare kaure anō hoki. Me ki he kaimahi anō hoki no kāinga ora. Good morning. Look, thanks for the opportunity to join the panel discussion this morning. My name is Amos Kamo. As mentioned, I work at Kāinga Ora. My tribal affiliations are Te Ngāi in the South Island and Ngāti Motu in the Chatham Islands. So look, I guess to address your question, and I'll pick up from Wayne's presentation in the first instance, because I think Wayne has addressed a couple of good examples of where cultural design integration was at the forefront. So Te Pai in Christchurch, the convention centre was supported by Ngāi Tahu right through the development, and it was through the integration of or involvement of Te Mata Pōpori, which is Ngāi Tahu's design consultancy, which is actually based out of Ngāi Tuahuriri, the local hapu in North Canterbury. They've been involved right from the outset in terms of creating a design outcome which integrates cultural landscape and cultural narrative. So the narrative of the local people associated with the land. That has been, I guess, the case for a number of the new developments, those anchor projects that we've seen delivered in Christchurch over the past 10 years since the earthquake. It's a really good example of true partnership and integration of iwi rōpū Māori into a development approach and a design exercise. And again, another of Wayne's examples involved a similar approach. It's a CRL project in Auckland, which has seen the involvement of the 19 tribes of Tāmaki Makaurau of Auckland, actively involved in the design outcomes of that project. So what we're seeing in New Zealand is, in particular over the last 10 years, is a deliberate step change led out from central government, which is then filtered through to local government around active participation of iwi rōpū Māori and our Pacific communities, which had an active involvement in the CRL project. So that's a deliberate move on the government, partly to give effect to legislative requirements under the Resource Management Act and other pieces of legislation, but it's also a recognition of the unique design approaches that support wellbeing outcomes that you see coming through Indigenous cultural design. And we see that also with the more active involvement of our Pacifica communities as well in achieving design outcomes across the 4 wellbeing areas, which are social or socioeconomic, environmental, and cultural. So it's a bit of a change of direction, and it's with us now and not likely to change anytime soon. I thought actually my presentation would start with giving a bit of a context around what is actually happening in the government sector, and how that will influence, I guess, the way in which large-scale projects, large infrastructure projects, the build industry will probably need to adapt slightly to be involving iwi rōpū Māori and Pacific communities as well in the design and delivery of outcomes and projects, but also where I guess the iwi sector is needing the support of build partners, as well as the construction industry more widely. So look, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but this is some of what you'll be seeing coming through the pipeline over the next year or so around strategic government direction. So the government has introduced a new strategy around Māori housing and infrastructure delivery. It's a strategy called Mahi Ka Ora. It was ratified this year and adopted. It's been led out by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. Complementary to that is Kainga Ora's own Māori strategy, which gives effect to Mahi Ka Ora through our delivery pipelines in around public and social housing, as well as urban development. These are some of the large-scale urban development projects we see in Auckland, in Puerto at the moment, as well as market and affordable housing delivery, and all the infrastructure improvements are required to enable an uptake of housing supply in New Zealand. So, next slide, please. In addition to the new strategy, we also have new funding streams that were announced by the government this year. So it includes the Housing Acceleration Fund, the 3.8 billion that was announced in March this year. Part of that is a contestable fund of $1 billion. It's the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund, which has been set aside for, by and large, for councils to enable infrastructure delivery to support housing outcomes. But it's also been available to developers as well as iwi rōpū Māori. Set aside or carved out also out of that fund is 350 million, which is the Māori Infrastructure Fund. That's a targeted fund to support Māori to enable housing, infrastructure improvements, again, also to enable housing developments. And the final fund there, Whaikainga Whai Oranga, is also a ring-fenced fund from HEF to support the delivery of Māori housing outcomes on Māori land. There's about 730 million in that space that's been set aside for iwi rōpū Māori housing development. So I'll explain the rationale, the opportunity there, I guess, for the infrastructure and housing sectors around those funding chains. Next slide, please. So in terms of enabling housing infrastructure outcomes, the government has established a working group called the Kea Partnership Program. It comprises of 5 government agencies listed here. I won't go through every single one. But the point of the partnership program is to triage partnership opportunities as they come through. So when iwi rōpū Māori are looking to apply for funding, the role of the partnership program is to triage the opportunities, figure out what the constraints are, which by and large are infrastructure for most developments, because a lot of these developments are on rural land, and make decisions on how funding is then allocated. As I mentioned, infrastructure is a major constraint for most housing developments in New Zealand on Māori land. Obviously, most of it's rural, some of it's urban. So in those cases, even still, if you're looking at a sort of a medium-scale development on a smallish block of land, you're still going to require bulk or trunk infrastructure improvements to enable the development. So it's the funding's been set aside to address those types of issues. Sorry, final slide. So part of, I guess, the need for or the requirement for development of Māori land is actually being able to partner with the sector. Where we also have some obligations on us around meeting our procurement outcomes and new government procurement outcomes, which is the 5% requirement to provide contracts to Māori suppliers. So we're looking to the sector, really, the housing and infrastructure sectors, to support Māori developers to enable capability capacity development. And we see that largely being leveraged through partnership arrangements and agreements. So iwi rōpū Māori are really reliant on the sector to provide the expertise that they need, one, to enable their developments, but secondly, to support their development of capability and capacity to be able to deliver the outcomes themselves, or in partnership with the sector. So it's going to be I guess what I'm signaling here is there's going to be quite a big demand on the sector from iwi rōpū Māori to provide the support they're looking for. So the partnership opportunities are there. It goes both ways. I mean, Māori have got the opportunity to address the issues they have around housing supply. There's a significant undersupply for Māori communities, but the demand is going to be very much still on the sector, on both the infrastructure sector and on build partners as well. So the opportunities there for partnership is significant. It's certainly what we're putting in place by way of policy framework design around our procurement practice, is trying to enable those partnership opportunities between Māori and the sector as well. So there's great opportunities for partnership. It supports kāinga order and enabling its partnership obligations to Māori on the Treaty of Waitangi, but it also provides a different way of partnering for the industry also. Kia ora.
Thanks, Amos. Just a follow-up question. You talked a lot about the cultural integration and active participation that's happening, and a lot about partnership that's happening between infrastructure and in particular Māori. Can you touch any more on any of the specific changes in the industry and how they're really embracing the cultural and tradition and applying that through design or other things in infrastructure development?
Yeah, so there seems to have been a noticeable uptake of interest in this space around cultural design integration into developments. I think it's partly driven by, well, an expectation from government, from central and local government around partnership opportunity. I think it's also partly driven by interest in creating unique or bespoke design outcomes, that are specific to New Zealand. So we're seeing more of that within the industry, more of an interest. There hasn't been, I wouldn't describe it as a significant uptake yet, but there is definitely an interest in doing things slightly differently. We've seen it right throughout the redevelopment of Christchurch. It's partly because Ngāi Tahu are front and centre. They are based, they are embedded in Christchurch. They are there, they are an active partner of the government. But that has had a sort of a knock-on effect as well, is that people are actually seeing these unique designs in built form and thinking, well, this is unique to New Zealand. There is a narrative that goes with this development. And I think New Zealanders on the whole are actually quite enjoying seeing that sort of change of new design integration. So I think we're going to see more of it. We'll certainly see, you will see it in the CRL project. It's prominent, it's explicit, the cultural design components and integration. The light rail program in Auckland is following a similar path. And also, if you look along the state highway projects delivered by Waka Kotahi, those you'll notice along the state highway, there's a lot more cultural design integration. The design is bespoke, the integration, it tells a narrative, it tells a story. It's unique to New Zealand, and it's what makes us unique as New Zealanders.
That's great. I mean, I work primarily in the vertical infrastructure space, and we are seeing more and more sort of elements coming into the design in there. And in particular, I know Precinct have a large partnership with their local iwi and getting them involved in the design and integrating that in the sorts of things they're doing. So thanks for sharing your insights with us, Amos. So our final speaker this morning is Jane Henley. Jane is the founder of Growth Lines Limited, a niche consultancy focused on the intersection and sustainability and innovation. For the past 12 months, Jane has led the OSM strategy workstream for Aotearoa. So Jane, how important is it for New Zealand to learn from what's being done overseas, and how valuable was your own offshore experience?
Yeah, thanks a lot. And thanks to Kea for hosting this. I've came back about 2 years ago, and I think, because this is a Kea event, I was asked to speak to, what that was like and how to navigate that. I think for me, it took about a year to get myself sorted on the ground. one of the things I noticed was when you're setting yourself up to come home, a lot of people try and do it before, but sometimes that's not possible. And, when you get here, it can be, quite a lot of pressure to try and figure out what you're going to do. I noticed there's a sort of choice point that you make at some point, whether you go out on your own and set up a consulting type business if you have quite niche skills like I do, or whether you're going to go for a job with a company like Holmes or some other slightly larger company. One of the things I noticed that in management positions, if you're applying for a management position, you tend to need to demonstrate have a network. So that can be really tricky when you're returning. I think the other thing that's expected when you're going for a role like that is that you're expected to translate your experience from offshore to how you're going to bring that back into the New Zealand market. And so sometimes that's a bit tricky when you don't know the New Zealand market very well. One of the things that this topic has a benefit on around innovation and sustainability and some of the more sort of technical areas is that anything that's new for New Zealand, I think it's much easier to step into from overseas because it's easier to demonstrate you've already had experience in an area, and when New Zealand is lacking some skills and some experience, it's a much easier area to navigate. So yeah, that's that translation from overseas to home. I'll finish that one there because I know we're running a bit short on time.
Thanks, Jane. So your area of expertise is actually in the sustainable building area. How do you think we can use innovation to drive sustainability in the infrastructure sector, and what opportunities does this present?
Yeah, so there's been a lot happening in New Zealand the last little while. There's been a massive increase in like compliance and reporting. I noticed all of the consultancies are hiring lots of sustainability sort of analyst type people. There's been a new financial disclosure piece of legislation. So now companies have to disclose their carbon impacts and, sort of anything that's material in that area. I know you, Roswell, you were going to put a link in if anyone wants to read some more about that. I see that is quite new, and it's driving a lot of activity in terms of people understanding what their climate impact is in their business, which is fantastic, because then as they tend to look at climate and carbon, it opens up the broader sustainability question around, what is their business impact. So often with sustainability, there needs to be some inroad, some reason to start looking at it, and that's obviously been carbon, and so that's really heating up. Noticing also an increase in sustainable advisory groups of boards, so not necessarily appointments of chief sustainability officer type experience to a board, but like boards that focus on sustainability advising, so off to the side. So I know that that's a trend that's happened in the US and other places, and eventually that becomes board members with that experience, but that's the kind of evolution that the governance seems to be adopting at the moment here. Seeing a few new roles emerging in different local and central government around sustainability and climate. So I think there's actually quite a skills gap in this area at the moment. I know that at Aotearoa, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in a minute, we went out for some green building expertise a couple of weeks ago, and we had to go to the sort of third request. We couldn't get someone to do some basic reviews of a building project. So lots of demand in this space at the moment. So if you have skills in this area and thinking about coming home, lots and lots of demand. So I thought it would just be interesting to just quickly cover kind of what I've been doing in terms of where sustainability now meets offsite manufacturing, that jargon OSM, offsite manufacturing, sometimes called modern methods of construction, and what we've been doing there and focusing on that for the last year. And I do work with Amos, and we've been doing some of the focus on, how do we partner with Māori in this space as well. So the question that I always ask myself why are we doing this? So why are we starting to look at OSM and that intersection of sustainability and innovation? And for me, that there's one key driver, and that's productivity. the increase in house prices is crazy here in New Zealand, as you know, but it's not just associated with all of the kind of macroeconomics and land prices. There's actually a lack of productivity in our sector. If you compare us to the automotive industry, over the last 10 years or so, they've increased their productivity by about 45%. In general, other industries have increased their productivity by about 25%. And the building industry across the board, 0 increase in productivity. So there's a lot of reasons for that, and the complexity of the value chain and the number of different partners, and in the way that we don't necessarily use a whole lot of sort of technology in the design and build and construction process. But yeah, I'd say the key driver around offsite manufacturing here in New Zealand now is productivity. And then when we couple that with sustainability, it's because it's easier to get sustainable outcomes during the factory build process. Less waste, you have more flexibility in where people can work outside of city centres. You've got potential 24/7 clocks, so you've got more flexibility in work time. Better health and safety outcomes because it's in a managed environment. And then the outcome that we're seeking is speed. Not necessarily at this point lower cost, maybe in the long run once the market matures, but it's speed to market. It's been able to work on the land separate to the house, bring them together in a very smart, logistically planned way, and decrease that whole build time. That's where we see the benefits. So at Kaingoora, over the last year, I've been helping work on the OSM strategy. And so what we've done is we've set targets. So that's a really key thing for any institution, is to go, okay, here we're at today, and this is where we want to get to. And the targets are a 20% increase in the use of offsite manufacturing each year. So at the moment, there's a baseline of about 500 units, which equates to about 15% of the Kaingoora pipeline. I think we delivered about 3,500 homes last year-ish. Don't quote me on these numbers. So it's a reasonable percentage of the build pipeline already, and so we're looking to just slowly and incrementally increase that. We have a program at the moment. We're calling it the Rapid Response Program, where we were using offsite manufacturing to meet some of our targets that we weren't quite making because of the delays in COVID. And so we're trying to use offsite manufacturing to both onshore and offshore, actually more local providers, to really respond fast, mostly volumetric solutions that can be synced up, as I said, manufactured and then put onto site, and we don't necessarily have those working in a linear sequence. So that's quite interesting. That program is really helping us move forward and establish a bunch of new relationships and look at how we're working and speeding up our own learning journey around offsite manufacturing. Part of the exciting part about that project is some of the things that Amos was talking about around some of our partnerships on the ground with Māori, to look at lease options, look at how we can help them with their own economic development and be part of this activity, as well as not just employment, but actual business creation. So we've got a few partnerships happening in that space as well. Outside Kaingoora, just so you get a sense of the size of this opportunity, Ministry of Education have a similar history. They've done about 400 schools. As you know, they've got kind of a history of using prefabbed houses, but they're really shifting to trying to change the mindset of that, being a much higher quality classroom as well. Defence have quite a big pipeline of building coming through that they're looking to use off-site manufacturing solutions. And MSD are really focusing on, Ministry of Social Development are focusing on that skills gap, and we're really looking at how do we fill that skills gap, not just from people coming home or offshore talent and skills, but how do we increase the skills around logistics and design and digital technologies and manufacturing within the industry here. So it's not just about bringing new companies in, it's about actually increasing the level of skills and knowledge and offsite use within the industry. So it's a real sort of diffusion strategy as well as bringing in the new. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense. I know it's a bit of a fly through, but I'll stop there and we'll take some specific questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Jane. It's really interesting to hear that. As you said, sustainability for most of us, we probably think about, the climate impact and the carbon, where that, and tying those things together. I would never have put productivity in that gap. So thanks for sharing that with us this morning. We do have a few questions that have come through. So the first one, before I ask anything, if anyone does have anything else, you can either use the Q&A section or the chat. We're monitoring both. So first question to you, Amos. How can we best shape ourselves as a consultancy of structural civil engineers to proactively embrace Te Kanga Māori? Do you feel the industry to be delivering this well, or do we have a long way to go?
Yeah, it's probably a way to go. It's a good question. I think there's some real genuine effort we're seeing within the industry to be able to demonstrate, an awareness of Māori practice, which includes like tikanga and mātauranga Māori, so Māori sort of knowledge into their companies. As mentioned before, iwi rohe Māori aren't really at a point where they're ready to be able to deliver projects themselves. So there is a big dependency on the sector. The new money that's coming from the government to enable Māori housing development and infrastructure improvements, the way I look at it is that most of that's going to be, a large portion of it will be channeled back into industries. So what Māori are going to be wanting to do is partnering with, that's a good question. So they're going to be wanting to partner with organisations that have good track record, but have some understanding and awareness of Māori customs and mātauranga and Māori practices. So I guess to answer your question, one way you might want to look at it is there are a number of consultancies that already have that type of expertise embedded. So like I'll use Boffa School as an example. They have a Māori team of technical people. Most of them are they're mostly design experts, so landscape architects, structural and planners that can be partnered with and brought into the company, any company I should say, to help develop our cultural competency. The other way to look at it then also is heading up the universities and tracking down, these rising stars within Māori. A lot of them are coming out of the engineering. There've got a few coming out of the engineering school at Canterbury University in Auckland. You've got people with design expertise, again, planners, architects, landscape architects. It's worthwhile, thinking about whether or not you might want to be looking to recruit some of these. This sort of skill set where you've got the combination of technical and cultural in these new graduates that are coming through the system.
Great. So next couple of questions aren't directed at any of you specifically, so I'll leave the floor open. Jane, you did touch a little bit on skill gaps, so you might be best placed to answer. But what are the skill gaps where the New Zealand market needs people most immediately? And then a follow-up question to that one was, can you see the development of any future roles that will be created or current roles areas that will see a low growth in the future?
Well, I'll answer it first, but Amos was part of COVE, so he might also have an answer. But I know there's a massive gap with development managers for us that have experience in offsite manufacturing. There's a gap in people with experience around logistics and a manufacturing mindset, even on site. And so to bring that sort of, how do we improve productivity in manufacturing within some offsite and integrating that into what happens on site. So experience in those areas. And then there seems to be a lot of skill gap around digitization of the building sector in general. So it's not just BIM, but it's also just about, logistics management and supply chain management and, everything that's sort of digitizing our industry. That would be the areas that I would say. Amos, what about you? Anything from COVE?
I think that's a good answer. The role of COVE as part of TEC is exactly that, is to address where we do have skill shortages. There are a number of work programs within COVE to address exactly that. We've got sustainability, we've got supply chain issues. There's 5 work streams. It's a 5-year program though, so it's we're at the beginning. We've barely scratched the surface on year 1. So there's a lot going to be coming through. We'll see a lot of change in the industry. Recommendations back into TEC around different types of training credentials that are required of the industry. COVE's job is to actually sense check, what the need and demand actually is, what we're creating, or what we're recommending, I should say, back in central government into TC is relevant to the industry.
Fantastic. Wayne, did you have anything you wanted to add more from a consulting side of things?
Yeah, cheers. Look, I think it's almost everywhere. You don't have to look very far, whether it's towards our kind of contractors that we work with, or other consultants that we partner with, or customer organisations as well. Everyone's looking for help. Everyone's kind of looking to recruit. I think we want. Yeah, I really like Jane's angle there on people with an understanding of the logistics cycle. I think that's really important to understand, especially for people at that kind of mid-level or in delivery of kind of project work or programs of work, to understand that we've got to be connected to a global supply chain and a local supply chain that work differently but are both essential to what we do, and then fitting that into our site and delivering it through our communities in a way that's productive but equally safe and efficient is I think a real challenge that we're contemplating, that's coming up more and more and more. So I think that's one specific area, and the other one that we see a lot of obviously is in digitalization, which has come up. But you know, aside from those two that we've kind of talked about, I think there's genuinely people are fairly hungry in the face of a big pipeline of infrastructure work over the coming decade and more, to make sure that we've got a really good base to build from, you know, and that includes getting people at all levels with all skill sets as well to kind of grow into the industry as the industry evolves.
Great, thanks, Wayne. So last question, Jane, is for you about productivity in the construction sector. So someone has said they're interested in engaging a tangible message from the statement in the context of improving practice of consultancy to increase productivity. What do you feel makes sense to focus on?
I'd say the one thing that we would like to see more of is different contracting methods. And I know as a consultant that's a little bit hard because you might not actually dictate the contracting method, but more integrated design, more decisions, more integration up front in a project, which is tricky contractually, I know, but that seems to be the area of working together in different ways that can drive productivity. I mean, if you look at lean, all the lean solutions, that's what they talk about. They talk about taking a linear supply chain or linear development process into a much more kind of you know, circular decision-making process up front. So that would be the one takeaway that I'd suggest, figuring out how you either have service offerings in that area, how you facilitate that more within the groups that you're already working with, or how you influence, you know, who you're working with to have different types of contracts that will enable that, because I know the contracting side of it can be really tricky, especially with government.
Awesome, thanks. I'm going to hand back over to Roselle to wrap up the session.
Awesome, thank you everyone. So to our speakers, Jane, Amos, Lydia and Wayne, ngā mihi nui, thank you very much. We really appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge and insights with our community. To our audience, thank you for joining us. We will send you an email with the recording later today. Enjoy your day, haere rā, goodbye.